On January 13th, 2025, Mr. John Jinapor, the energy minister designate, reported that Ghana's energy sector debt hits $3 billion. He raised these concerns about the growing debt burden in Ghana's energy sector, describing it as a critical issue that requires urgent attention. He noted that this increase compounded existing challenges, particularly the government financial obligations to the independent power producers, who stood at $1.2 billion as at October 2024. These staggering figures indicate there is the need for robust financial management to address the growing liabilities. As an academic institution, GhIE, under which we have the Brew Hammond Energy Centre and the Department of Economics, we are interested in the causes of these debts, the impact of the debt on the Ghanaian economy, and the recommendations that we need to have to address these growing liabilities. Based on this, the Center and the Department of Economics have decided to bring in an expert in the energy sector to speak to these issues to fellows of the Center. This expert is in the person of Dr. Nii Darko Asante. Fellows, you are most welcome to today's event, and I will introduce our guest speaker so that we all get to know who he is, to enable him start the presentation. But before that, I'll call on the director of the Energy Center, Professor Dr. David Atokwansa, and the head of Department of Economics, Professor Otuna Beye, to make a few remarks. So, Director, kindly make your remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bosco. It's a pleasure to see this event come on live. So let me say a few words about the center. We were established by KNUST about 15 years ago to harness and deploy the vast research capabilities and skills within the university to address the increasingly complex challenges of energy and sustainability within Ghana and across the continent. We are hosted at the College of Engineering, but the center works in a truly multidisciplinary fashion, and we network over 110 world-class experts from all the 6 colleges of the KNUST system. So we bring together expertise in engineering, economics, architecture, forestry, chemistry, physics, environmental science, sociology, political science, accounting and finance, among others. And with this broad range of expertise, we conduct training, we undertake research, and provide consultancy and advisory services to a broad range of clients. So with our diverse expertise, we cluster around 7 research teams, and these are solar energy, bioenergy and biofuels, wind and hydro, energy efficiency and demand side management, green hydrogen and energy storage, electric vehicles and sustainable mobility, and the energy policy and system modeling, the group led by Dr. Bosco. So we are glad indeed over the past 15 years to have worked with various partners within Ghana, across the continent and around the world. We've worked with the African Union in shaping continental strategy on renewable energy-based electrification using both solar PV and wind. We've worked with ECOWAS through GhIE, the ECOWAS Center on Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, to have a harmonized regional approach to solar energy utilization through what's called the ECOWAS Solar Energy Initiative. We did this in the early stages of the organization. We also have worked across the sub-region to establish the framework for ongoing capacity development activities in the area of renewable energy and energy efficiency. Within Ghana, locally, we've been very active with various organizations. We've worked to shape the energy landscape, for instance, through our active contribution to initiatives such as the Renewable Energy Law, which was first passed in 2011, Act 832, and the development of Ghana's energy transition framework. We have a wide range of partners who've helped us to come this far. IRENA, GhIE, the African Union, and its special agency, AFREC. We've received support from NORAD, the World Bank Cities Alliance, Danida GIZ, the German state of North Rhine-Westphalia. We've worked with the UNEP, UNDP UNIDO, USAID, the Energy Commission, Ministry of Energy, the EU Commission, and I should mention the Climate Compatible Growth initiative of the UK government and the Centre for Global Quality, among many others. But today, our public engagement and knowledge dissemination activity, as part of this event, we host this special session on Ghana's energy sector, focusing specifically on the sector's debt. And the aim for us as a center and as a university is to bring some light and perspectives to this important subject that confronts us. And to do this, we have an outstanding speaker who will be introduced shortly. Before I hand back to you, let me gratefully acknowledge the partners for this event. We have the CCG, the Climate Compatible Growth Initiative of the UK government, the Ghana Institution of Engineering, partnering us on this, and the College of Engineering, where we are hosted, and of course, our parent institution, the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology System. Special thanks to the Energy Policy and System Modeling Group, led by Dr. Bosco, who is our moderator, and lawyer Obing Mensah. I'm grateful to you on behalf of fellows for your hard work in bringing us this far. And of course, to our seminars and workshops committee chaired by Dr. Eliel Kilson. So moderator, back to you, over.
Thank you, Director. Professor Otnabeye is online, and we will allow him to make a few remarks. Prof.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm very excited that this seminar has come on, and we are happy that is Department of Economics to be part of this innovative series, and also that Dr. Bosco from the department is leading this. So the topic is very concerning, that is Ghana's energy sector debt and probably its sustainability. So the Brew Hammond Energy Centre also having a focal point on issues like this is very important. So as Director said, as of this year, around January 12, 2025, the energy sector debt has escalated to over $3 billion, a significant increase from the 2.1 billion recorded in somewhere 2017. This mounting pressure actually is very substantial and poses a lot of challenges to energy infrastructure affecting operations of key institutions in the industry, such as the ECG, VRA, GhIE, and the rest. Now, the financial strain actually hampers the ability to invest in critical infrastructure and innovations, and will impact the reliability, sustainability of our power supply. We are all concerned about this. So we are happy to have Dr. Asante to really lead this talk and help us understand the data and then the impact that it has on our economy and at large. So in this seminar, we are happy to have our students also join in, and all other stakeholders has been identified by our director to discuss this strategy and explore sustainable solutions to this energy sector challenges that we are facing, especially the debt issues and its sustainability. So I'm happy, and I would dare to say that everyone's participation is very important as we collectively seek to develop an action and insightful and policies that will ensure a stable and prosperous energy future for Ghana. Thank you for this opportunity, and I yield back to our moderator, Dr. John Dramani Bosco. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor GhIE, Head of Department of Economics. I will now introduce our resource person, Dr. Nii Darko Asante. Dr. Asante is an energy consultant with over 30 years experience in the energy sector. He is a former member of the board of the PUREC. His expertise in the energy sector covers policy development and implementation, utility regulation, and energy management and optimization. He was previously a technical director of the Energy Commission, where he was responsible for the development and enforcement of regulations in the electricity, natural gas, and renewable energy sectors, and execution of initiatives to promote renewable energy and efficient use of energy. He has previously lectured at the University of Ghana, where he was part of the team that set up the School of Engineering Sciences and acted as the first head of the Food Process Engineering Department. Prior to this, he was the technology manager of the energy optimization business, Aspen Technology Incorporated, based in the UK, where he developed tools and implemented solutions for energy management and optimization at refineries and petrochemical plants all over the world. Dr. Asante is a chemical engineer with a BSc from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology and master's and PhD degrees from the University of Manchester. So fellows, students, and other partners on this platform, this is our resource person. Dr. Asante, we are ready for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you all for joining this seminar. I hope you can all hear me fine.
Yes, it's very clear.
I would also like to acknowledge that Professor Brew Hammond was actually the chairman of the Energy Commission at the time that I joined the commission. So it's very much a pleasure to make this presentation today. What I would like to do in my presentation is to answer really three questions. What is this energy sector debt? Where did it come from? And essentially, how do we fix it? As we all know, this topic is quite political in its overtones and undertones, and I'll try as far as possible to steer clear of those political minefields, but hopefully to provide information that will be useful to us all. So starting off, what is the energy sector debt? And all the data in this section will come from the Ministry of Energy, two documents that they produced in 2019 and 2023. So there are links to all the documents. But essentially, energy sector debt is essentially something that arises from payment arrears, bills issued but not paid due to revenue shortfalls. So at the end of 2018, the Ministry of Energy indicated that the cumulative net sector arrears totaled about 2.8 billion US dollars. And they also projected that if nothing was done to change the rate at which these debts were being added on, by the end of 2023, this debt would have escalated to over 12.5 billion US dollars. This was the projections made in the Energy Sector Recovery Program document. And you can see approximately 1.5 rising up to 2.5 annual increments in the shortfall. Now, this shortfall came from a number of issues: excess power generation capacity, which we have heard a lot about, but there was also an excess of gas supply. We had take or pay arrangements with the Sankofa gas fields, where we had to pay for gas which we had not yet been able to take. There was also the challenge of public sector entities not paying their electricity bills. There was the technical and commercial losses, including thefts and non-payments from street lights and all that, which the electricity distribution companies were bearing. Then in 2017, partly in response to a manifesto promise, the government or the PRC reduced tariff, and this was felt to have caused part of the debt. And then PRC also did not continue to adjust the tariff in line with changes in economic indicators. And lastly, the delays in completing gas infrastructure, which would have allowed us to take all the gas that was available, also further compounded the situation. And all of this is contained in the document. It's not something that is essentially my understanding. The conclusion for the Ministry of Energy in 2019 is also very interesting. They stated that Ghana's energy sector is not, or at that time, was not financially sustainable. And in addition, there was a sentence that they pointed out that there were large fiscal implications on Ghana's sovereign credit rating, and that we are at risk of future downgrading. This was in 2019. So it does beg the question that when we suffered the economic meltdown in 2022, did the energy sector contribute to this event? This is a thought I leave with you to consider. Then in 2023, there was an update to the position. And as a result of the things that the Energy Sector Recovery Program had implemented, the projected shortfall was reduced by about 4.8 billion, almost 5 billion US dollars. And a number of actions were taken to achieve this. But I'm focusing on the last two, which is the Ministry of Finance making sector stabilization payments and the ESLA payments. And it's important to point out that all of these were essentially the result of bond issuances. The ESLA was essentially bonds, and the sector stabilization payments were also payments that I believe came from the Ministry of Finance getting some funds from bonds it had issued, whether it was Eurobonds, to make substantial payments to primarily the IPPs and the gas suppliers. Unfortunately, the 4.8 billion reduction didn't bring the shortfall to about, or the projected shortfall to about 7.7 billion as expected, because of higher than expected exchange rate differentials and worse than expected performance by the SOEs, that's the state-owned enterprises in the power sector. As a result, there was some increment that had not been captured, and the debt was rather projected to reach about 8.2 billion by the end of 2023. Another thing to notice is their proposed treatment of legacy arrears. Now, what are legacy arrears? They are just arrears which have accumulated at a selected date or point. So that's an arbitrary point. In 2019, the selected date was 2018. In 2023, I'm not sure at this point where they had selected the date, but these are debts that are captured as due for payment. And since you don't have the money to pay it, you do some financial restructuring, which is fancy language for just saying you push the debt into the future. So the debt doesn't go away. It's no longer a debt, but it's a future payment that you have to make. So it's still a liability. But bear in mind that it's waiting for you somewhere in the future. So in 2025, there are some debts we pushed from 2023 or 2018, which are waiting for us to pay them. So there's always a payment after a number of years. And this is important because if you haven't provided for the funds, it's like a time bomb waiting for you. Now, what's the significance of all these debts? There is a link to the doomsaw that we have come to know and possibly hate. When ECG in particular is unable to fully pay power suppliers, especially IPPs, for the power supplied, the power generators cannot pay for fuel, and that leads to doomsaw. When the power generators refuse to supply power, as GhIE did last year, that also potentially leads to doomsaw. When the power generators do not properly maintain their plants because of lack of funds, as may have occurred to VRA, that also may lead to doomsaw. Then on the other side, if we are running short of capacity and ECG is unable to contract new power suppliers, then the insufficient capacity at peak times will also lead to doomsaw. And when there's insufficient capacity to deal with unexpected events, such as a pipeline being unavailable, that can also lead to doomsaw. So the long and short of it is that debts invariably will lead to a higher likelihood of us experiencing the unwanted doomsaw. So we know what it is, but how did we get there? Where did the debt come from? In order to understand this, we need to take a trip down memory lane. So looking at Ghana's energy sector and the major events that occurred over the period. Before 1961, we didn't have Akosombo, so there were lots of regional thermal power plants, and power supply was part of government finance. Nobody really knew whether we're covering costs. Government just made it happen. Then we got the dam, and for the first few years, things were good. VRA was very profitable. It was able to pay off the debts that was taken to build the dam. And most of the funds from this came from Valco, which was the foundation customer for the dam, and it was paying in hard currency, so there was no problem at all servicing the loans for the dam. The dam was also providing cheap power, and so we had low power tariffs and everyone was happy. When it started, not all the turbines of Akosombo were in operation, and we had lots of excess capacity to take up whenever we needed. But by 1983, things had changed. We had major problems, and Valco had to be curtailed so that we could have power elsewhere. We also extended power to the north of Ghana, and that cost quite a bit and impacted on VRA's financial reserves. And as a result, from being a very profitable company, VRA came under financial stress by the end of this period. And therefore, this period was really a turning point in the power sector, where we moved from the exclusive hydro, where it was cheap and affordable and in excess. So at that time, excess capacity was not a problem. Then we moved to the period where we began bringing in thermal power. We couldn't do this purely with VRA. We had to go to the World Bank, and they put us through the power sector reform program. There are a number of things that went on, but essentially the power sector was chronically in debt. And we also experienced more and more load shedding until we got to the famous 2011 or 2012 to 2016 load shedding, which brought by the name Doomsor. But all through this period, our debts, our receivables became more and more of an issue. I mentioned 1983. Those of you who were around at that time will know that that was probably Ghana's worst year ever. We had a nationwide drought, which led to load shedding because the dam inflow was not sufficient. The poor rainfall led to food shortages. There were even widespread bushfires. It affected the inflation in the country. The cedi plummeted in value. There were extreme petrol shortages. I remember being in a petrol queue. For those of you who know Accra, the petrol station was at 37, and I was queuing all the way at Burma Camp, which is over 2 kilometers away. And eventually that queue got all the way to the trade fair, about 6 kilometers long. All of this led to unrest, and the universities were closed as a result of looters in all 3 universities. There was an attempted coup that almost succeeded. And to add to all that, about 1 million Ghanaians were repatriated from Nigeria, and many of them just came with what they were wearing. It was a terrible time for Ghana. And as a result of all this, the impact on the power sector was not the headline. So let's look at how it impacted the power sector. I've already said the dam excess capacity had been exhausted, so VALCO had to be curtailed. And this is when it became apparent that VALCO was a key part of VRA's profitability. This hurt VRA's finances severely. There was also inadequate preparation for an introduction of thermal power. Once the dams were exhausted, that's both Akosombo and Pong, we needed to bring thermal power, but we were not preparing or prepared for it. We spent a sizable amount of money sending power to the north. This was a great initiative, bringing development and much needed development towards the north by bringing cheaper power. They were still using diesel generators at this point. However, it also brought VRA to its knees. So a good thing with unintended consequences. And I'll sort of liken it to the free SHS of the current time. It's a good thing, but as we all know, it had some unintended, unwanted consequences. So Ghana, as a result, was totally unprepared for the 90s and the advent of thermal power. And so we had to go to the World Bank, and this was where the Power Sector Reform Project came in to enhance private sector participation because the public sector was not doing so well. The key changes that came as a result was that GhIE was born, transmission was taken out of VRA, NEDCO, the Northern Distribution Department, or Northern Electricity Department became a company, and the regulators, PRC and Energy Commission were created. Increasing amounts of private thermal generation came in. VRA was no longer the dominant power it used to be. And of course, hydro diminished in its significance. But what stayed the same is that within the public as a whole, we still held a perception that power was a public service, a right for the Ghanaian. We deserved it, and we didn't really have to be struggling to pay for it. The public sector SOEs also didn't really pull up their performance, and so we had high loss levels associated with their performance. Power sector did not, the revenues in the power sector did not fully cover the costs, and as a result, debts began to rise. At the same time, power shortages led to increasingly frequent load shedding events. So let's look at debt again. How did this debt show itself? And in this context, we are looking at accounting treatments. When you look at the accounts of some of the entities, you'll see increasing levels of trade receivables. This indicates that they've issued bills, but they've not received their payment. This is not unusual, but normally receivables will be settled within 30 days. And receivables that go beyond a year may be considered doubtful because it means somebody's having problems. In our energy sector, we had large and growing receivables, and many of them were from more than a year, and this indicates some systemic problem. We also have to understand that although the receivables were growing in magnitude, some of this was because the power price was also going up. The other thing you'll notice is that there was a large gap between payables, that is the money that the entities were due to pay out, and the receivables, which is the money they were owed. And this large gap indicates that essentially, even if you're able to collect every single pesewa that you are owed, you would still not be able to pay out to the people that you owe, and you'd still be in debt. And this means that you would not be able to settle your indebtedness without some form of external support, which is essentially, in this case, government. So let's look at how it actually appeared in the accounts of first VRA. And you can get all the accounts on their website. And we noticed that in 1980, they had only about 4,000 Ghana cedis in receivables at the end of 1980. This rose rapidly till 2023, where now the receivables were over 9 billion Ghana cedis. This is invoices they had issued but not been paid. Of course, a lot of this would come from ECG not paying them. So let's look at what ECG was facing. Their financials are only up from 2000, but it still shows a similar growth, up to about 9.8 billion in 2023. So in a sense, they were owed enough to completely settle whatever debts they had with VRA, except that they owed a lot more than VRA. They owed the IPPs as well. If we look at the real picture for ECG, what we see is that their payables, that's their debts to all the generators, IPPs and VRA, was actually a whopping 36 billion at the end of 2023. And as we've seen, they only had receivables, money they were owed, of 9.8, just under 10 billion. So even if all the MDAs paid them, if everyone who owed them paid them, they would still be left with 26.6 billion Ghana cedis of debt to pay, with no source for that money, except possibly government stepping in to support. Meanwhile, if we look at the Energy Commission's Energy Statistics Report, we see that in the same year, 2023, they purchased about 15,000 gigawatts of power, gigawatt hours of energy from all these power plants, but they only sold 11,000 gigawatt hours. This means that 4,000 of it just went lost. This is what we see as distribution and losses, both the technical and the commercial losses. This is close to 27% of the energy being lost, whereas the tariff, I believe, covers just around 20% losses. So as this gap grows, how can ECG survive? Is it even a viable entity? Is it solvent? But tariff is also an issue, and let's see how tariff plays into all this. If the tariff is below the costs, it will also mean that ECG can never cover its costs. It will operate at a loss and will require a bailout by its shareholder, and that wouldn't be due to its doing. It will be locked in a cycle of growing indebtedness. However, this shouldn't happen because PRC is required to set tariffs that cover costs. Unfortunately, we the citizens don't really want PRC to set cost-reflective tariffs. The labor unions don't want these cost-reflective tariffs. And the government that wants to please its citizens also doesn't want PRC to set cost-reflective tariffs. So is it surprising that most likely these cost-reflective tariffs are not being set? There's a consequence to this. When the cost-reflective tariffs are not set, there's a gap between the actual cost and the tariff that is set. And in 2022, this gap from the tariff was about $500 million per year. And it arose mainly from the cost of excess capacity, that is power plants that were not expected to be used, that PRC explained it did not pass through the tariff, but it also did not pass unused capacity, that is power plants which are used, but at any given time are not being used to their full available capacity. And lastly, foreign exchange losses. The exchange rate that PRC used in its tariff determination were often much lower than the tariff that actually occurred in the course of the period. Having said all this, most of us may probably feel that tariffs in Ghana are too high. So why should anyone talk about increase of tariffs? Indeed, the perception that tariffs in Ghana are too high is probably that, yes, that's true. The reality, however, is that the tariff in Ghana is below the West African average. And this is revealed by a look at a report from the financed by the African Development Bank that was commissioned by the ECOWAS Regulatory Authority, which showed that Ghana had in 2019 the fourth lowest tariff in the sector. This does not mean that our tariff is not high, but it just means it's not unusually or unreasonably high. So in summary, our current energy sector debt is the product of many years of persistent poor choices. It's also the result of poor performance of the distribution companies in their collection of revenue. It's worsened by our public acceptance or condoning of electricity theft because we feel that power prices are too high, or we feel that there's so much corruption that's the reason, and so therefore we shouldn't pay it. It's also the cumulative effect of below-cost electricity tariffs. And we are all united in resisting tariff increases. So the regulator is unable or unwilling to exert its legal independence and do what it is mandated to do. And when all this is done, the only person who can get rid of the debt is government. And they did that for a long time till it got to the point where government itself had to bail itself out by having this domestic debt exchange and the Eurobond exchange or haircut for investors. So we know what the problem is. We know how it came about. The question now is, how do we fix it? I'd like to first reframe the problem in terms of looking at it from the position of the actors. So our power crisis or debt crisis is because staff and management of the SOEs are failing to take the actions they know are required and are facing no sanctions as a result. They are not collecting the revenue that is due them. The regulators in the power sector are also failing to properly discharge their functions to ensure that they set tariffs that ensure the power sector will remain solvent. Political actors are supervising all this and possibly even encouraging the behavior of the management of SOEs that adversely impacts on the finances of power sector SOEs. And we, the public, are generally happy to ignore all this, provided it doesn't lead to a tariff increase or load shedding events, or we ignore it until the two of them happen. I don't list corruption here, not because I don't recognize that corruption is also part of our problem, but the reality is there's corruption in every sector in Ghana, but not every sector is facing the crisis that the power sector faces. In fact, the petroleum sector probably has as much, maybe even more corruption, but we no longer have a petroleum sector debt which is crippling the sector. And so corruption clearly is not the only cause of our problem. So how do we fix the problem? In my view, our problem is extremely simple to fix, despite all that has been said. We know what to do. We have experienced managers, we have experienced engineers. They know how to fix the problem. They know how to collect revenue. They know how to reduce technical losses. It's not for lack of knowledge. We simply need to do what we know how to do. We need to just do it. Apologies to Nike for taking their brand. Unfortunately, even though it's simple to do, it's not complex, it's not easy. And it's not easy because it requires management that fail to deliver to be sanctioned. And this is unpleasant, especially when they are people you have appointed as a reward for services already rendered. It also requires the regulators to increase tariff whenever required, even in election years, knowing very well that it will meet public approval or disapproval. It requires the political actors themselves to subjugate their personal or partisan interest to the national good, something which has been a challenge over the years. And lastly, it requires we, the public, to accept the inevitable hardships that this will impose on us initially. Clearly, it's easier said than done, and it will take courage to bite the bullet. So we look at other alternatives, and privatization has often been spoken of as an alternative. Now, privatization will certainly remove government and partisan political control. It will allow the new private entity to operate with profit as a motivation. And that means the private entity will improve losses, will improve performance and reduce losses so that it can make more profit. The private entity will invest funds so long as they know that they can recover those funds. And there are a few other benefits as well. But there are necessary consequences. The tariffs will have to cover the cost fully. Otherwise, the private entity will not come in or will not invest. The private entity must see a possibility of making good money. That's their motivation. If there's no possibility of profit, they will not come in. Also, even if they take on all the staff in the sector, they'll want to be able to get rid of ineffective or unproductive staff. And so some people would lose their jobs. So since these are the very same things that we need to do to solve the problem, why don't we do them now rather than privatize and have some new actor come and do it to us? So there are some other issues with privatization. It can actually fail to fix the problem. And if the government, for instance, selects a private entity that cannot or will not fix the problem, we will not get the desired solution. But even if we get a good, competent, solvent private entity, if it can make profit without fixing the problem, it will do so. And if it cannot recover funds that it needs to use to fix the problem, it will not fix the problem. So the privatization would have to be done in a way that compels the private actor to fix the problem. Privatization can bring in new skills, expertise, and technology. But as I've said, we already have extremely qualified and experienced managers in the sector. The technology required is accessible once one is willing to pay for it. I'm even aware of technology that is available here in Ghana that can significantly help us to reduce losses. For some reason, we have not availed ourselves of it. Privatization can also provide cash where it's desperately needed. And I think that is the area that one needs to look at. The new owner could inject funds into ECG and ONECO, but the scale of the values we would receive today would be very low because ECG is technically insolvent. Government could use funds received to settle some of the debts that are coming, but at the moment, it wouldn't get very much. But at the end of the day, the new owner will have to believe they can make more money from buying ECG or any part of it than they invest in getting ECG. So that is the reality. So what I would propose is that government should first appoint managers that it's willing to sack, people that are not being rewarded for services already rendered, but people who are coming to perform a task. They can still be members of the ruling party or friends of the party, but they should be prepared to lose their jobs if they don't perform. And they should be given a well-defined task, measurable and quantifiable. I'll put a 2-year sort of limit to perform because we need to get rapid results. And the target would, of course, be to make a significant dent in the losses and leakages that we are all seeing. We'd also need to require PURC to complete its move to full transparency of tariff setting and be explicit in fully capturing all the costs in power generation, transmission, and distribution within the tariff. It should also allow stakeholders to input into the way those costs are located between different consumer classes. And after all this is done, after 2 years, when some recovery is demonstrated, then we could consider privatizing in stages on the stock market, for instance, as well as to maybe a large strategic investor in a competitive manner. The reason for this is that it would give us funds to settle the debts which we are currently carrying, those legacy debts, some of which have been pushed into the future and are waiting for us in 2025, 2026, and 2027. We know that we don't have the money to pay that, and there's no source of money. This is one place we could get the money to pay for those things. So in summary, we have high tariffs, but at the moment, they do not cover the costs. We need cost-reflective tariffs. That's non-negotiable. Whether we privatize or not, we will still need to do that. We need proper cost allocation. Any price discrimination between customer classes, lifeline, or whatever, needs to be fully transparent and economically justified. We need to implement more cost control. Our managers have to ensure that power, especially power plants, are procured in a competitive manner and not at what may be inflated prices. And we need to do proper planning so that we do not have a crisis. That means we have to pay over the odds for power. The high distribution and collection losses need to be addressed. We don't need the one-off publicity stunts that ECG often does. We need these things to go on throughout the year consistently to reduce the losses. We need to publicly prosecute power thieves, publicize when we do so, use prepayment meters selectively and effectively, and above all, we need to demonstrate that paying bills is something that everybody does. Even the highest people in our society should be shown to have, whether it's prepayment meters, and be paying their bills. If the highest people in the land are paying bills, it sort of undermines people's sense that I'm a big man, I'm whatever, I don't need to pay. And for the immediate credit crunch, yes, we can push it to the future, but we need to make sure we have a way of paying for that debt. So in summary, or in conclusion, I want to say that if the solutions to our problems were easy to implement, it would have been done long ago. So they are not easy, but I'm saying they are simple. And we need courage to take on the challenge and fix the problem. Thank you. Mr. Moderator, I am done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asante, for your thought-provoking presentation. Thank you so much. It is now time for us to pick a few questions for you to address for us. I have some of the questions here. Fellows, kindly put your questions so we can read them out for Dr. Asante to address for us. Question number 1 says, can we use the natural gas from our oil fields to generate electricity to reduce our indebtedness? Let me read a few of them, then Dr. Asante will address, and then we go to the other ones as well. Question number 2 says, electricity is produced in US dollars, and we Ghanaians pay power in cedis. Should we introduce a quarterly price adjustment anchored to the forex exchange rates? Question number 3, before Dr. Asante comes in. The challenge is the political influence on our public institutions. How exactly can we remove this, since it doesn't look likely that political influence will die anytime soon? So, Dr. Asante, if you could please address these questions, after which I'll read some more questions for you to address for us. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. I'll take the middle one first. Quarterly adjustments, PRC actually does this already. The quarterly adjustments are meant to take into account the movement of the cedi and the dollar. And so whenever the tariff goes up, it's primarily because, actually that's the main thing, because the exchange rate has moved along. And so the quarterly adjustments that PRC does handles the exchange rate changes. When it comes to oil from our fields, The oil is in Ghana, but it still costs money. Just like we pay for gas that is coming from fields that are in Ghana, and we pay in dollars. Even if we take oil from our fields, we will have to pay for it. So unless we want to turn the oil sector into another debt sector where we owe the oil companies, we don't really have an option. We either pay for foreign oil supplies or we pay for local oil supplies, but we still have to pay for it. And it doesn't really matter so much where we get the oil from. And the last one about political influence, that really is the crux of the issue. But we have to recognize that we, the people, are the biggest influence on the politicians. I always stress that tariffs do not go up, not because politicians are afraid of tariff. Politicians are afraid of the reaction of the public. That is why they are resistant to increasing tariff. If instead of only being resistant to tariff increases and doing so, we're also resistant to our power sector entities becoming insolvent, that would change the calculations of our politicians. So I strongly believe that our, should I say, over-focus on our comfort without averting our eyes to our future comfort is part of what creates the problem we face. We are as much a cause of the problem as the politicians that we criticize. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Asante. Let me read out the second set of questions. 1, do you buy into the idea that decentralizing generation of electricity will reduce losses and further reduce cost to consumers? What about government support for decentralized solar for homes? The second one, in your estimation, will you advise debt financing or equity financing or both? If you propose, in what capital structure mix do you recommend? 3, what are your views of creating competition for electricity generation or for ECG? Let me take it again. What are your views of creating competition for ECG? So Dr. Asante, kindly address these ones as well. Then I'll read the next set of questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So decentralizing generation, it doesn't actually affect the losses in any way. The losses are happening, well, it will eliminate transmission losses, but the transmission losses are not that significant. We are talking of the order of 3 to 4%. It occasionally rises maybe 5%, and that's high. So when you do decentralized generation, we don't have transmission losses. But the distribution losses, which are in northwards of 20%, close to 30%, will still be very much part of our problems. So it wouldn't really make a huge difference. When it comes to solar for homes, it's one of those things which has mixed impacts. All over the world, it's a challenge for distribution companies because solar essentially reduces the amount of energy that homes or industry or businesses will consume from the distribution company. But then there are lots of fixed costs that the distribution company has to bear. And those fixed costs are sort of spread out against our consumption. So when we consume less, it means the effect of those fixed costs go up. So whilst solar for homes is a good thing, it does create a bit of a challenge for utilities in terms of their cost structure. Having said that, it's something that the distribution companies have to manage and plan and prepare for. So it's not really a solution for our debt situation. It can actually make it worse, but we know it's good for the environment and it's good generally for the homeowner who takes solar because his prices would go down somewhat. When it comes to financing, I'm not really sure what is being financed, debt or equity. Generally, PRC had a benchmark where it said it wanted, I think, 70-30 as a benchmark, as in 70% debt, 30% equity, basically on the understanding that equity costs more than debt. So when you are paying for equity, you have a higher rate than when you are paying for debt. But that's basically what PRC has when it comes to power plants and so on. Competition for ECG. The fact of distribution is that on the whole, the distribution of electricity is inherently a monopoly. You cannot really compete on distribution. You can compete on the sale of electricity within a distribution network. So if ECG stopped selling power and only wheel power, like what GhIE does, and other people used ECG's infrastructure to sell electricity to consumers, then yes, you could have competition. As in, I could buy from one supplier as opposed to the other supplier, but all of them will be using ECG's network. Our current problem is that the bulk of our losses are coming from distribution. So if you had competition in sales, there will be no impact on the losses that distribution is having. You could improve collection, as in those receivables I was talking about, where the private entity will make sure it collects the bills for what it's owed. But if, as we can see, the bills issued do not match the power that is coming into the sector, then we'll still have a problem. Next questions, please.
Thank you, sir. The next round of questions. Which technology identified in Ghana can reduce losses in ECG? Can you share with us? 2, do you buy? 2, let me read this one. 2, does it mean ECG can close receivables and payables gap when PURC set tariffs? Question number 3.
It's not rocket science. This is something that is available and from multiple suppliers. Just happens that there's one here. Okay. If PURC increased tariff, would it close the gap? It would go some way to closing the gap, but increasing tariff on its own will never close the gap. When you increase prices, the incentive to steal power gets higher. If you're not doing anything to discourage power theft, all you do by increasing tariff is to encourage theft. So increase of tariff has to go hand in hand with credible, effective mechanisms to catch power thieves. And it's not as if Ghana is unique in having this challenge with power theft. This is a problem worldwide. It's just that we seem to think that we can preach to people and advise them and they will stop. That is not reality. We have to take active steps to catch, prosecute, and expose those who are stealing power. We also need to take the steps to make sure that there's not as much unmetered consumption as actually exists. I'm not sure what the level is, but there are people consuming power in Ghana that ECG knows have no meter. The excuse is that there's no meter to install at that particular premise. So ECG will estimate your monthly consumption and bill you accordingly, which of course encourages you to make sure you consume a lot more than you're being billed for. So there are a number of people who do not have meters. Yet, whenever ECG gets more meters, they'll come and replace your meter. You have a meter now, they'll give you a new meter and throw away the meter that you had. they will not go and put meters very often in the places that have no meters. I can't believe that this is purely accidental. So we need to do both. PRC needs to increase tariff where required, and we need to take active steps to prevent theft and loss. Tapping into green, it's possibly a second or third level impact. It's definitely something we need to do. It's definitely something we should do more of, but it cannot replace the bulk of the things that we need to do. If we are losing money in billions, this may probably give us some millions. It will not by any way solve our problem.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asante. So we now take the last questions. Question 1, what is the current state of the West Africa Gas Pipeline Initiative? Is it in operation? Question 2, what is the situation and concern with regards to electricity exports to neighboring countries and debt profit issues? The last question.
The last bit of the question.
What is the situation and concerns with regards to electricity export to neighboring countries and its relationship with debt and profits? The last question, how significant has the variation in the exchange rate affected our energy sector debts, and what remedy do you propose?
Thank you. So the state of the West African gas pipeline is that it is in operation. I think the shutdown for maintenance has been postponed into February. So currently it is transmitting gas from our gas fields in the west to Tema, where it is being used to generate gas together with gas coming from Nigeria and coming to Tema. So the West African gas pipeline is currently in operation. It is helping to provide gas to our generation plants in Tema to generate power. The export situation, we export power mainly to Benin and Togo, I believe, and now also to Burkina. There is some exchange of power with Cote d'Ivoire, but we don't have major exports to Cote d'Ivoire. Exports generally bring in much needed foreign exchange, but as with our own power sector, there is potentially sometimes delays in them making payments because they also have their issues. But I believe on the whole, it strongly supports VRA to conduct their operations, bearing in mind that they no longer really have VALCO being the bulwark that it was in shoring up their finances. Since we bought VALCO, it's not performing to any extent close to what Kaiser was able to do in supporting VRA's operations. So we are exporting power. Every time we have some sort of disruption, we may reduce how much we give them, but we dare not cut it off because they are very much a lifeline to our energy sector. It doesn't change our debt situation because all of this is factored into the way tariffs are set. So once they pay their way, they help VRA to stay afloat. Lastly, on the forex rate, we all know what happened in 2022, and you'll recall that our power tariff went up quite sharply in that point. It's not gone up as sharply in recent times. So every quarter, when PRC looks at the forex rates, what it projected and what has happened, it will have to adjust the tariff accordingly. It's basically a function of our economy and how it performs. The generation cost is close to 80% of the cost of our power. And our generation cost, apart from the VRA portion, is in foreign exchange. So when the exchange rate goes up, power tariffs directly and immediately. And we all know how the cedi dollar rate has been performing. So you can sort of see how our tariffs have been impacted over the months and years. I hope I've answered all the questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asante. Participants, kindly turn on your cameras so that we can take a snapshot. Dr. Akwesi-Poku. Akwesi.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
I'm doing that now.
Yeah, kindly do that for us.
Very well. Please be smiling. Over to you, Doc.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
To all participants and then to the guest speaker. We'll now take a few remarks from the director of the center, Professor Atokwansah. Prof.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bosco. I think the resource person has given us so much to process. It was a lot of information to process in a space of 30, 35 minutes. Very rich in data, and his years of experience in the sector really was brought to bear. He's taken us through the how the debt was accumulated, and for students of the energy sector in Ghana, this is a treasure trove of information. We've seen how the debt was accumulated. We've seen the contributory factors to the debt. We've also, and he's been very, very frank and not been shy to say the issues as they are. This is really what we wanted, something to bring light to an issue that is often characterized by more heat. So we have a lot of light now, a lot of data from those of us in academia to policymakers. There's so much work that we can do. He believes the solution is really simple. It's extremely simple. The issue is extremely simple to fix. It is not for lack of knowledge, but he also says it is not easy to do because it requires the courage to bite the bullet. So let me, on behalf of fellows of the center, extend our heartfelt appreciation to you, Dr. Nii Darko Asante. I believe your late board chairman will be very excited to see you share so much knowledge on a platform that is named in honor of his memory. At this point, let me once again thank the partners, the CCG, the GhIE, the College of Engineering, the Department of Economics. Professor Abeye, thank you so much for releasing Dr. Bosco and his team to work with us at the center. So on that note, Dr. Moderator and your team, I hand over back to you.
Thank you, Director. Just a few announcements. Please, we are going to make sure the recording is made available to fellows and all participants on our website, as well as the slides. We will also encourage all participants and fellows to follow our pages for next sections of seminars. So thank you so much for coming. And when we call on you, we hope you attend in your numbers, just as you did today. Thank you so much. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.
Bye.